I thought my marriage was unbreakable until my wife sat me down and told me she wanted her lover to move in with us. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't just walk away. I would make her regret it for the rest of her life. I always believed that my marriage was solid, unbreakable even. After all, Melaine and I had spent 10 years together, building a life, creating memories, and overcoming the little obstacles that every couple faced. We had a lovely home, stable careers, and a routine that felt comforting rather than mundane. But that illusion shattered one evening, right there in our dining room, when Melaine sat across from me with a hesitant smile and a look in her eyes I couldn't quite place. "Alex, we need to talk," she said, placing her fork down gently on her plate. I should have known right then that something was off. I set my own utensils down, wiping my mouth with a napkin. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before speaking again. "There's something I need to tell you, and I want you to keep an open mind." My stomach twisted. "All right," I said cautiously. Her fingers tapped against the table as if searching for the right words. "I love you, Alex. I really do. And I don't want to lose what we have. But I've also developed feelings for someone else." Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for her to smirk and say she was kidding. But she didn't. Instead, she continued, "His name is Josh. And well, I want him to move in with us." My body stiffened. My mind raced, struggling to process the insanity of what she had just said. "Excuse me?" I finally managed to choke out. She reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled mine away. "Alex, please. Just listen. This doesn't mean I love you any less. It just means I love him too. We've been together for a while, and I think this is the best way to keep our marriage while still being honest with each other." I could barely hear the rest of her words over the ringing in my ears. The audacity, the absolute gall of this woman. She wasn't asking for a divorce. She wasn't even admitting to an affair in shame. No, she was asking me to allow her lover to live under our roof. I clenched my jaw, forcing my emotions into a steel box. This was not the moment to explode. No, I needed to be careful, calculated. "You want him to move in?" I repeated, my voice eerily calm. She nodded, mistaking my restraint for understanding. "Yes, I know it's unconventional, but I truly believe this can work." "And if I say no?" I asked, watching her closely. For the first time, doubt flickered across her face. I'd really like for you to at least consider it. But if you absolutely refuse, then I don't know. I don't want to leave you, Alex. But I also don't want to give him up." There was the ultimatum wrapped in sugar-coated words. I exhaled slowly, pretending to consider it. "All right," I said finally. "Let's talk about this more over the next few days. I need some time to process." Relief flooded her face. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I just want us to be honest with each other." Honesty. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to the even rhythm of Melaine's breathing. How long had she been lying to me? How many nights had she slipped away to be with him while I sat at home, oblivious? I had always believed that when confronted with infidelity, a man had two choices: leave or forgive. But as I stared at the ceiling, an idea formed in my mind. A third option, one that would ensure that neither Melaine nor Josh would ever recover from the consequences of their actions. If she wanted to play games, I would make sure she regretted every second of it. The next morning, I kissed her on the forehead before heading to work, just like I always did. She smiled, blissfully unaware of the war I had just declared in my mind. Step 1. Gather intel. I spent my lunch break contacting a private investigator. I needed to know everything about Josh, the kind of dirt that could ruin a man. By evening, I had also ordered a few discreet security cameras, including ones with audio recording. If they wanted to betray me, I would have the evidence to expose them both when the time was right. Step 2. Secure my finances. That weekend, while Melaine was out running errands, I locked myself in my home office and reviewed all of our shared assets. I started moving money into my personal accounts, preparing for the inevitable fallout. If she thought she could humiliate me and walk away with half of everything, she had another thing coming. Step 3. Play the long game. When Melaine brought up Josh again a few days later, I pretended to be open to the idea. I asked questions about how she envisioned it working, what role Josh would play in our home. I acted the part of the confused but loving husband, trying to understand his wife's needs. And she fell for it. I watched as she texted him late at night, giggling at her phone while she thought I was asleep. I noticed how she started dressing differently, making an effort she hadn't made for me in years. And I let her. I let her dig herself deeper, let her think I was weak, clueless. In reality, I was orchestrating the perfect downfall. By the time Josh officially moved in, I had gathered enough evidence to make sure he and Melaine never saw happiness again. And they never saw it coming. As I sat in the car outside our house, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind reeling from the betrayal I had just uncovered. My wife, the woman I had trusted with my heart, had been unfaithful. The evidence was undeniable, and now I had to decide what to do next. Walking into the house, I kept my expression neutral. I couldn't let her see the storm that was raging inside me. Penny greeted me with a smile, the same smile she had given me for years, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I forced myself to act normal, nodding as she spoke about her day, my stomach turning with each word. She was a liar, a cheater, and she had no idea that I knew. That night, as she lay beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I could confront her right now. I could wake her up and demand answers. But that wouldn't be enough. No, I needed more than just an apology or an excuse. I needed proof. Proof that would destroy her lies. Proof that would ensure she faced the consequences of her actions. I reached for my phone and began setting my plan into motion. The first step was gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I accessed her phone records, her email, even her social media accounts. She had been sloppy. The messages between her and Rick, her so-called friend, were all there. Explicit, incriminating, sickening. She had planned this for months, meeting him in secret, weaving a web of lies to cover her tracks. But she hadn't counted on me finding out, and she definitely hadn't counted on what I was going to do next. The following morning, I went about my day as usual. Penny kissed me goodbye before heading to work, completely unaware that I had already made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to make sure she lost everything. Over the next few days, I laid the groundwork for my revenge. I gathered bank statements, documented her meetings with Rick, and even installed a small camera in the house to capture anything incriminating. And then I waited. I waited for the perfect moment to strike. It didn't take long. That Friday, Penny told me she was going out with her friends. I smiled and nodded, pretending to believe her. But as soon as she left, I followed her. My heart pounded as I watched her pull into a cheap motel parking lot. She stepped out of the car, adjusting her dress, and walked inside. Not even 5 minutes later, Rick arrived. They thought they were being discreet, but I was one step ahead of them. I parked down the street, pulled out my camera, and recorded everything. I had all the proof I needed. The next morning, I confronted Penny. I placed my phone on the table, pressing play on the video. Her face drained of color as she watched herself walk into that motel. "What is this?" she stammered. "What do you think it is?" I replied coldly. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. She tried to deny it at first, then she tried to justify it. She said she was lonely, that she felt neglected. I laughed. "Lonely? You had me. You had everything. And you threw it away for him?" She had no response, just silence. I grabbed the divorce papers from the counter and slid them toward her. "Sign them," I said, "and pack your things. You're leaving today." She begged. She pleaded. She swore it was a mistake, that she still loved me. But I was done listening to her lies. "You didn't love me when you were sneaking around behind my back," I said. "You didn't love me when you chose him over me." Penny broke down, sobbing, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no remorse, just satisfaction. She had betrayed me, and now she was paying the price. But I wasn't done yet. Rick needed to face the consequences too. I sent the videos and messages to his wife, Tanya. Within hours, his life fell apart. His wife kicked him out, his job found out about the affair, and he lost everything. Penny called me later that night, furious. "You ruined his life," she screamed. No, I said calmly. He ruined his own life when he decided to sleep with another man's wife. Days passed and Penny moved out. The house was quiet, but for the first time in weeks, I felt peace. The weight of betrayal had been lifted. I had gotten my revenge, and now I could finally move on. But just as I thought it was over, Penny showed up at my door, desperation in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "give me another chance." I stared at her for a long moment before shaking my head. "You made your choice," I said. "Now live with it." And with that, I closed the door, leaving her and the past behind me forever. The moment I stepped outside the house that night, I knew there was no going back. The cold air bit into my skin, but the fire inside me burned hotter than anything the wind could throw at me. My entire life had just been upended, my trust shattered, my love turned into something ugly and twisted. I replayed the moment over and over in my head, the look on her face when I confronted her, the way she stammered through her excuses, trying to justify the unjustifiable. But nothing she could say would erase what I had seen, what I now knew to be the truth. I drove for hours that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The city lights blurred past me, but I barely registered them. My mind was elsewhere, stuck in the past, in all the memories we had built together. The vacations, the late-night talks, the way she used to look at me like I was the only man in the world. Had all of it been a lie? Had I been nothing more than a placeholder while she entertained someone else behind my back? I ended up at a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was nearly empty, save for an old couple sitting in the corner and a tired-looking waitress who barely glanced up as I walked in. I ordered a coffee, though I knew I wouldn't drink it. I just needed a place to think, to figure out my next move. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to just sit back and let her get away with this. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages again, reading the sickening words she had exchanged with him. The plans they had made, the things they had said about me. My stomach churned with disgust, but I forced myself to keep reading. Knowledge was power, and if I was going to make her pay, I needed to know everything. The first step was gathering evidence. I had already taken screenshots of her messages, forwarded them to my email just in case she tried to delete them. But that wasn't enough. I needed proof that would hold up, something that would leave no room for her to twist the narrative in her favor. That meant getting physical evidence, something concrete. I spent the next day carefully setting things up. I placed a small recording device in our bedroom, hidden among the books on her nightstand. Another went into her car, tucked under the seat where she'd never notice it. I even installed a GPS tracker, something subtle enough that she wouldn't think twice about the app running in the background of her phone. I wasn't just collecting proof. I was preparing for war. That night, I acted as if nothing had changed. I came home, greeted her with a smile, played the role of the devoted husband while she continued living her double life. It took everything in me not to call her out, not to throw the truth in her face and watch her crumble. But I had to be patient. If I wanted real justice, I had to play the long game. Over the next few days, I gathered everything I needed. The tracker showed me exactly where she went when she worked late. The recorder in her car picked up phone calls she made, laughing and whispering sweet nothings to the man she had chosen over me. Every time I listened, it felt like another knife in my chest, but I pushed through the pain, because soon she would feel it too. Then came the moment of truth. I followed her one evening, parked a safe distance away, as she met him at a hotel just outside the city. I watched as they disappeared inside, my heart pounding, my vision going red. I could have stormed in right then and there, made a scene, let my anger explode in front of them. But I didn't. Instead, I took photos, recorded timestamps, built my case. By the time I returned home, I had everything I needed. The next morning, I paid a visit to a divorce lawyer, laid out all the evidence. He listened quietly, nodding as I spoke, then leaned back in his chair and gave me a small, satisfied smile. "She's not going to see this coming," he said. And he was right. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I let her continue, let her dig herself deeper. And when the moment was right, when she was least expecting it, I unleashed everything. I left the divorce papers on the kitchen table, along with a neatly organized folder containing every piece of evidence I had gathered. Then I packed my bags, walked out the door, and never looked back. The fallout was immediate. She called me screaming, crying, begging for a chance to explain. I let her words fall on deaf ears. I had already won. And as I sat in my new apartment that night, looking out at the city skyline, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. She had betrayed me, but in the end, I was the one who walked away stronger. And that, more than anything, was the best revenge of all. The night after my plan had been set in motion, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every minute that passed felt like a ticking bomb, each second inching me closer to the inevitable fallout. I had spent weeks carefully gathering evidence, setting traps, and ensuring that when the final moment came, there would be no escape for Lisa or her lover. Now, the countdown had begun. Morning came faster than I expected, and I forced myself out of bed, stretching my sore muscles. The tension of the last few weeks had left me exhausted, but today was not the day to slow down. Today, everything would change. I checked my phone, seeing the forwarded emails, the GPS tracking report, and the audio recordings from the devices I had planted. Everything was in place. Lisa was still blissfully unaware, likely believing she had me wrapped around her finger. It was time to remind her just how wrong she was. After grabbing a quick breakfast, I left the house and drove downtown to meet my lawyer, Alan. He was waiting for me at a quiet cafe, his expression serious. "This is airtight," he said, flipping through the documents I had provided. "You've got her dead to rights." "Good," I replied, sipping my coffee. "I don't want any loopholes. She doesn't get to walk away from this." Alan nodded. "With the prenup and the evidence of infidelity, she won't see a penny from you. And since she's been using marital assets to fund her little rendezvous, we can argue for damages. She'll walk away with nothing but regret." That was exactly what I wanted. I had spent years building a life with Lisa, providing for her, loving her, and in return, she had thrown it all away for a cheap thrill. It was time for consequences. That evening, Lisa came home acting as if everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and started making dinner. I played along, keeping my responses short, my tone indifferent. If she noticed anything was off, she didn't show it. "So, I was thinking we could go away for a weekend," she said, smiling at me over the kitchen counter. "Just the two of us. We haven't had time for ourselves lately." The audacity of this woman. "Sounds great," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "We should definitely spend some time together." She beamed, completely oblivious. I watched her, wondering how she could be so cold, so manipulative. But it didn't matter. She had already lost. The next morning, I executed the final phase of my plan. I had arranged a meeting at a high-end restaurant, inviting Lisa, her lover, and his wife under different pretenses. Lisa thought it was a romantic dinner. Her lover thought it was a private rendezvous. His wife had been informed by an anonymous email that she needed to be there to see the truth for herself. I arrived early, securing a table in a secluded corner where I had full view of the entrance. Lisa walked in first, dressed to impress, clearly expecting a night of passion and deception. Her lover arrived a few minutes later, looking equally smug. And then, just as planned, his wife walked in, her expression unreadable. The moment Lisa saw her, I watched as confusion turned to panic. Before she could react, I stood up. "Lisa, darling," I said smoothly, my voice dripping with mock warmth. "Why don't you introduce me to your friend?" "And his wife, of course." Lisa paled. Her lover looked like he wanted to run. His wife? She looked like she was about to explode. I slid a folder across the table. "I think this belongs to all of you." Lisa hesitated before opening it. Inside were printed copies of their texts, photos of them entering hotels together, screenshots of their email exchanges. Her lover's wife snatched the folder from her hands, her eyes scanning the contents. And then the slap came. A loud, resounding crack as she struck her husband across the face. The restaurant went silent. Lisa turned to me, her eyes wide with desperation. "Michael, please, I can explain." "Don't." I cut her off. "Save it. I'm done listening to lies." The next few moments were chaos. Her lover's wife stormed out, throwing her wedding ring at him. Lisa tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "You made your choice," I said, standing up. "Now you can live with it." I left her there, sitting in the middle of the wreckage she had created. By the time I walked out of the restaurant, I felt lighter than I had in months. The divorce papers were already on their way to her. She had no money, no support, and now no one to manipulate. As I stepped into my car, I took one last look at the restaurant. Lisa was still sitting there, her head in her hands, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. I sat alone in my new apartment, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the coffee table. The city outside was alive, but inside, it felt like the silence was suffocating. Penny's betrayal still played in my mind like a broken record, but now there was something else. Something that burned hotter than anger. Clarity. I had finally seen her for who she truly was, and that realization alone gave me a sense of peace. The divorce had been finalized just a week ago. It was a swift process thanks to the overwhelming evidence I had gathered. Her pleas, her late-night calls, the text messages begging for another chance. They all meant nothing. The day she signed the papers, she had the audacity to ask me, "Donnie, do you ever think we can be friends again?" I had laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that even surprised me. "Friends? Penny, I wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire." That was the last time we spoke. Judy had been my rock through it all. Even when I told her I was leaving town for good, she understood. "You have to do what's best for you," she said, squeezing my hand. "But just know you're not alone." I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I couldn't stay in the same town where every street corner held a memory of Penny and me. I needed a fresh start, far away from her, from Rick, from everything that reminded me of the life I had lost. The next morning, I loaded up my Mustang and took off, leaving behind nothing but ghosts. The road stretched before me, and with every mile I put between myself and that past life, the weight on my chest grew lighter. I had no destination in mind, only a direction, forward. I found myself in Phoenix, a place where the sun was relentless, and the air smelled of opportunity. The first few weeks were a blur. I settled into a small but comfortable house, started a new job, and slowly began rebuilding my life. But even with the new surroundings, Penny's betrayal still lingered in the back of my mind like an old wound that refused to heal. Then one evening my phone rang. It was Judy. "Hey, Donnie, I know we talked about moving on, but I thought you should know. Penny's been asking around about you. She's been telling people she regrets everything." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Judy, I don't care. I know. But there's more. She's not just asking around. She's been trying to find out where you live. She told Tanya she wants to see you, just one last time." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What does she think is going to happen? That I'll just let her waltz back into my life? "I don't know," Judy admitted. "But I thought you should be aware." I thanked her and hung up, but Penny's persistence gnawed at me. I knew her too well. She wasn't looking for closure. She was looking for a way back in. 2 weeks later, my suspicions were confirmed. I was walking out of a coffee shop when I spotted her. Penny. She was sitting on a bench across the street, her eyes scanning the crowd. When she saw me, her face lit up like she had just seen an old friend. I froze for a moment, then turned on my heel and walked in the opposite direction. "Donnie, wait," she called out, her voice desperate. "Please, just talk to me." I kept walking, my heart pounding, but she was relentless. She ran up, grabbing my arm. "Please, just 5 minutes." I looked at her then, really looked at her. She was thinner, her eyes tired, her usual confidence replaced with something pitiful. "You have 30 seconds, I said coldly. She swallowed hard. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I messed up in ways I can never fix. But I can't stop thinking about you. I can't sleep. I can't eat, because I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." "You still here?" Unblinking. "You didn't lose me, Penny. You threw me away." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was stupid, Donnie. I was so stupid. I didn't know what I had until it was gone. I miss you. I miss us." I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, just emptiness. "That's your burden to carry, Penny. Not mine." She let out a shaky breath. "Is there really no chance? Not even a small one?" I stepped back, shaking my head. "You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to undo the damage you caused. I loved you once, but that man is gone." For the first time, she truly looked broken. "I don't know how to live without you." I gave her one last glance before turning away. Then learn. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in months. Penny had been my past, but she had no place in my future. I was done looking back. It was time to start living again.